One last logistical consideration. How were they going to feed 1,000 ships full of warriors?
What's your thoughts there, logistician?
The Trojans would have gathered all the local food and water that was available and pulled it within the walls of their defenses for their own use and as a means of denying it to the use of the Greeks. The Greek army, therefore, would have to go further and further afield to gather those supplies of food and water that they were going to need to subsist on. And the primary risk there is that they would alienate those local populations that heretofore had not been engaged in the conflict but would now be inclined to come in on the side of the Trojans.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, John, because it looks like the Greeks were divided between what they should do in order to win most easily and what they had to do in order to survive as an army. They had no choice except to support themselves off the land by foraging and by raiding.
It was precisely the result of one of those raids that started Homer's Iliad. Agamemnon and Achilles fought over a woman that Achilles had captured during a raid. Agamemnon pulled rank and claimed Achilles' war prize for himself. Achilles raged and reached for his sword.
Someday, I swear, a yearning for Achilles will strike Greece's sons and all your armies. But then, Agamemnon, harried as you will be, nothing you do can save you, not when your hordes of fighters drop and die, cut down by the hands of man-killing Hector. Then you will tear your heart out desperate, raging that you disgraced the best of the Greeks.
Achilles withdrew himself and his troops from battle, and the raids the Greeks conducted drove the neighboring population into an alliance with the Trojans. The Greeks lost their advantage of overwhelming force, and the war dragged on for 10 long years with no clear victor.
I think from the point where Homer begins the Iliad, where there is a quarrel between Agamemnon and Achilles, his most important warrior, it's clear that this is not altogether a coalition of the willing that he has brought to Troy.
The trouble for this coalition of the unwilling started 10 years earlier, back on mainland Greece, where Agamemnon plotted a course of revenge and plunder. There, he would be forced to make the ultimate sacrifice: the ritual murder of his... Troy, a Bronze Age center of world trade. Sung about by Homer, his Iliad and Odyssey were the first literary works of Western civilization. But was the mythological city real? Archaeologists seemed certain they had discovered the legendary lost city. But what evidence was there of the enemies of Troy, the Bronze Age Greeks and Homer's King of Kings, Agamemnon? How did Agamemnon forge a coalition of Greek warlords to wage a war of revenge and plunder? This is the true story of Troy. West of Troy, across the Greek islands dotting the Aegean, lies mainland Greece. Athens, Sparta, Pylos, Olympus, and at their center, the largest and richest of the Bronze Age principalities, Mycenae. Amongst these ruins is evidence of their wealth and power. Spyros Yakovides is the godfather of Mycenaean archaeology and director of excavations.
I have been working here since '58, which means for 40-odd years. And I have come to love the place. Mycenaean civilization was a time of very active interconnections. People had to come through Mycenae or through the area of Mycenae wherever they wanted to go.
Just the sight of this fortress sends a message of power to friend and foe alike. The city's walls rise 40 feet and span 25. Christofilis Magidis is Assistant Director of Excavations. He's at the main entrance, a 20-ton stone carving called the Lion Gate, which dates to the time of the Trojan War.
The main element here is the lion relief on top of the gate in the relieving triangle. Here we have an amalgam of political statements and religious allusions.
The column represents the house of the king, and the lions his power and protectors. A massive display of the king's divine right to rule.
A very strong statement for the incomer at the first moment he enters the citadel.
In 1876, just inside the Lion Gate, Heinrich Schliemann uncovered one of the richest finds in archaeological history, including a magnificent golden death mask. Proclaiming, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." High atop the citadel, archaeologists uncovered remains of a palace, much like one described by Homer. Inside, they discovered a treasure trove of opulent relics and murals, glorifying Mycenaean war and conquest.
We have scenes, beautiful scenes of a besieged city with tall buildings and women looking out of the windows, warriors, chariots and horses. One cannot but think that these scenes reflect, or at least echo in some way, all the adventures of the Mycenaeans in southwest and northwest Asia Minor.
On the terrace of the palace, overlooking the rich valley and beyond to the Aegean, kings like Agamemnon would feast with fellow warlords. Homer described such a feast that took place across the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Pylos, in the kingdom of wise old King Nestor, another hero of the Trojan War. Here in 1996, in the basement of a regional museum, archaeologist Sharon Stocker found boxes of burnt animal bones. Stored there by the famous archaeologist Carl Blegen more than 50 years ago and labeled table scraps, Stocker found something peculiar about them.
What we have represented here are bones from the thighs and the mandibles of bulls, male, cattle, and probably about 10 individuals are represented.
The meat from 10 cattle could feed 6,000 people, and the fact that the remains were specific body parts and all from bulls made Stocker and archaeologist Jack Davis suspect they had something more than mere table scraps.
It was here that he found the objects that we've been most interested in.
Yes.
That is, in this corner, more or less, must have been the gigantic heap of animal bones.
Did the bones represent the animals eaten at the feast?
A little bit closer to the wall in here had to be the spearhead.
Was the spearhead the butchering tool?
And then I think off here must have been the pile of little kilikas, the miniature drinking cups.
In Blegen's 1950s excavation, thousands of kilikis were discovered in every corner and corridor of Nestor's palace, representing thousands of guests drinking.
All of these objects were grouped in close proximity here, one to another.
But they also found one more piece of evidence. Written in a primitive script known as Linear B. Translated in the 1950s, the tablet revealed another purpose for the feast.
So it's about here that the tablet was found that proves that sacrifices were in the process of being made in honor of the god Poseidon.
Piecing together the evidence, Stocker and Davis painted a clear picture of feasting in the Bronze Age.
Okay, so Sherry, if we were coming here to a feast, this must be where we get our first glimpse of the actual banqueting area.
The guests, Homer said, ate well, and no man's hunger lacked a share of the banquet. The young men brimmed the mixing bowls with wine and poured rounds for all.
They would have seen the power of the kings displayed there on the walls above them as they were participating in the feast, as a kind of reminder of what the Mycenaeans were capable of doing.
Yes.
By providing this feast and sacrifice, the king presented himself as the messenger to the gods, and his call to war as divine destiny. Was a feast such as this, in this opulent setting, a way for the king to lure warriors to join him in a battle against the Trojans? But as a final appeasement to the gods, King Agamemnon had to make the ultimate sacrifice: the ritual murder of his own daughter.